The headlines were loud, but the courtroom was louder. And chilly if you thought Kandi Burruss and Todd Tucker's marriage was unbreakable, well, break it did, because after months of whispers, leaks, shady comments, and that infamous prenup meltdown, the court has finally stamped the papers. Yes, baby, the divorce is official. And the way this thing unraveled? Even Tyler Perry couldn't write it, but here's the real gag. Why did Kandi file quietly, while Todd tried to flip the whole thing into a courtroom circus? Why were secret recordings suddenly popping up like popcorn? And why is the internet convinced this divorce has nothing to do with love, and everything to do with money, manipulation, and somebody's suddenly inflated ego? Because according to Insiders Anonymous, of course, the best kind, this wasn't just a split. This was a strategic takedown, and the judge allegedly had to stop TWICE just to regain order. What was happening in that courtroom? Chairs flying? Truth bombs dropping? Mama Joyce praying in tongues? Tonight, we're digging into the finalized divorce that just shook the entire Bravo universe. Grab your popcorn, your prenups, and your emotional support wig, because this story? It's messier than Todd's entire storyline on our HOA. When the courthouse doors opened that morning, even the security guards looked like they didn't want to be there. Because everyone already knew this wasn't going to be a regular divorce hearing. This was Kandi Burruss versus Todd Tucker, season finale edition, with more plot twists than the entire Real Housewives franchise. And the moment Kandi walked in calm, collected, dressed like she was going to negotiate a multi-million-dollar music deal instead of ending a marriage, you could feel the shift in the room. People whispered. Cameras clicked. Meanwhile, Todd walked in 10 minutes later, adjusting his collar, sweating like he had 3 different versions of his story rehearsed and still didn't know which one to use. See, that's the thing about this divorce. On paper, it looks clean. Kandi filed, court finalized, move on. But behind the scenes, this wasn't a split. This was a battlefield layered with old grudges, secret recordings, silent wars, and money trails so messy accountants would need therapy. And the moment both of them sat down, you could tell the judge already regretted taking the case. It started when Todd's attorney stood up first, talking about how Todd had been pressured into signing the prenup years ago. Pressure, that's when Kandi lifted her head so slow it looked rehearsed. Because if there's one thing that sets her off, it's someone acting like she begged them for anything. But Todd kept his face straight, nodding like he was in a documentary about wrongful prenup victims. Then the attorney claimed Todd deserved spousal support. And not just a little, he wanted the kind of support people only ask for when they're trying to retire early. The courtroom exhaled in unison, but then came the moment everyone still can't stop talking about. Kandi's team pulled out what they called Exhibit B, a video recording. The judge leaned forward. Todd's eyes widened. Kandi didn't blink. The attorney pressed play, and suddenly the courtroom heard Todd's own voice, years ago, casually saying he was ready to sign the prenup. No pressure, no hesitation, no problem. The room went silent like oxygen had been removed. Todd froze. His attorney froze. Even the stenographer paused her typing like she needed a moment. That's when the judge looked over her glasses like she was witnessing a plot unravel in real time. Todd's entire argument fell apart before it even began. And yet, instead of backing down, his attorney tried to continue with confidence that wasn't convincing anybody. It was giving struggling community theater actor on opening night. He claimed the video was taken out of context, as if there's a context where willingly saying I'm ready to sign with no pressure magically turns into I was forced. But the drama didn't stop there. Because right when the court tried to move on, Todd pulled out a new request. He wanted a forensic audit of all marital assets. And at first, people thought it was a strategic move until it became clear he was fishing, throwing a hook into the water hoping to catch a scandal that simply didn't exist. Meanwhile, Kandi sat back like someone watching reruns of a show she's already won an Emmy for. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't even sigh. She just waited for the judge to respond. And respond the judge did. She told Todd's team they needed actual evidence to request that level of investigation. Evidence they did not have. Disappointment washed across Todd's face so noticeably the court reporter wrote it down. But instead of accepting that the strategy was falling apart, Todd doubled down. He leaned over, whispered something to his attorney, and suddenly the man stood up requesting a private sidebar. Kandi's lawyer looked annoyed. The judge looked exhausted. The sidebar lasted 7 minutes, and when they returned, Todd's team looked even worse than before, and this is where the energy in the courtroom shifted. Kandi finally spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't attack. She simply clarified that she had been financially supporting the household, their children, and yes, Todd's projects without ever complaining. The judge listened closely because Kandi wasn't telling a sob story. She was stating facts, numbers, receipts, hard evidence. Things Todd's team couldn't replicate. From there, things got even more chaotic. Todd brought up old arguments, old television clips, moments he claimed showed he was dismissed or ignored. Imagine trying to use reality TV confessionals as evidence in court. The judge blinked twice before reminding him they were dealing with legal reality, not Bravo reality. But Todd didn't stop. He insisted he had been emotionally neglected, which made some people in the gallery exchange looks like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Then came the part that almost made the judge lose her patience. Todd's attorney mentioned he wanted a review of child-related responsibilities, not custody responsibilities. It sounded vague, messy, and unnecessary. But beneath the surface, it was obvious Todd was trying to build a pattern. If prenup pressure didn't work, if financial claims didn't hold, maybe he could build an emotional narrative. Except that narrative fell apart when Kandi's attorney brought up how involved Kandi had always been. Not just financially, but emotionally, logistically, professionally. Kandi handled everything. Todd's contributions were acknowledged, but they weren't foundational. And the court noticed. Still, Todd wouldn't let go. He tried to pivot to lifestyle arguments, saying the marriage became too business-like, which was ironic considering business was the only area Kandi had consistently succeeded in. Meanwhile, Todd kept pitching shows that never saw daylight. But he acted like he was the one carrying the creative load. The judge didn't buy it. By this point, spectators felt like they were watching a man trying to hold sand in his hands. Every argument slipped away. And then the moment happened that turned the entire hearing upside down. Todd's attorney requested something so extreme, so out of left field, the entire courtroom gasped. He wanted to revisit parentage documentation. It wasn't phrased as a DNA test request, but it was close enough that everyone understood what he meant. Kandi's jaw tightened. The judge's face dropped. Even Todd looked like he realized he'd gone too far. But it was too late. The words were spoken, recorded, and echoing through the room. Kandi's lawyer immediately stood, furious. And for the first time in the entire hearing, Kandi's controlled calm cracked just a little. Because questioning maternity or paternity in a marriage with no evidence, no prior suspicion, and no logic is beyond disrespectful. It was character assassination disguised as legal strategy. The judge shut it down instantly. She called it inappropriate, unfounded, and an abuse of the court's time. Yet, in that moment, everyone felt the shift. Todd had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And Kandi knew it. The judge asked if they wanted a recess. Kandi nodded once and stood up, leaving the room with her team. Todd stayed seated, staring at the table, looking smaller than he had all day. And when Kandi returned 10 minutes later, her silence was louder than any argument. She walked back in with a decision written across her face. She was done arguing, done defending, done explaining. She wanted the marriage legally ended without further spectacle, but just as the court prepared to finalize the session's proceedings, something unexpected happened, and the reason Todd froze like that wasn't because he was shocked. No, he froze because somebody in that courtroom had just pulled the nuclear option. One of Kandi's attorneys quietly slid a manila envelope across the table and said, "We can present this to the court, or Todd can voluntarily disclose, and the way Todd's entire face dropped. You would have thought somebody unplugged him from the wall. Suddenly, the man who was ready to argue, ready to perform, ready to posture looked like he didn't know whether to run out the door or crawl under the judge's bench. The courtroom got so silent you could practically hear his heartbeat trying to escape his chest inside the envelope. According to an anonymous source who claims to have been close enough to see the color drain from Todd's face, was a collection of screenshots, financial transfers, and time-stamped messages. Not just messages transactions. Not just transactions secret transactions. Not just transactions secret transactions. Allegedly, Todd had been rerouting funds from joint accounts into a production development fund, except every time someone tried to verify the studio. The address led to an empty warehouse with a flickering light bulb and dust older than Riley. And apparently the judge saw the paperwork, leaned back, folded her arms, and said, "Mr. Tucker, would you like to explain this?" Todd cleared his throat so many times the stenographer started counting at his dialogue. But here's where the scandal gets delicious. The moment the judge's tone changed, the courtroom gallery started buzzing. People whispering, phones vibrating, someone's publicist texting so fast they could have started a fire. Because if those funds weren't going where Todd said they were going, then suddenly the quiet divorce Kandi tried to keep private became a full-blown financial investigation. And that's when Kandi's team dropped the second bomb, allegedly. Todd had been using one of their joint business accounts to personally fund independent creative projects, which sounds innocent until you realize one of those projects was a short film starring a woman nobody had ever seen, identified only as RK, and let's just say the internet already thinks they know who RK is. But that wasn't even the worst part. The judge asked Todd if this creative partner had ever been compensated. Todd said no. Kandi's attorney said yes. The judge asked for clarity. Todd said he would have to check emails. Kandi's attorney said they had the screenshots printed, highlighted, laminated, and ready to submit. And the judge just looked at Todd like, "Sir, please don't embarrass yourself any further," then, with the kind of dramatic pause you only see in courtroom movies. Kandi whispered something to her lawyer, and her lawyer calmly said, "Your Honor, my client is prepared to testify that these payments began during a period when Mr. Tucker was frequently absent from their household." Citing production demands, the whole room inhaled at the same time. Suddenly, the story shifted from quiet divorce filing to potential marital misconduct and hidden spending, and the cherry on top. Someone in the back gasped so loudly the deputy had to tell them to leave. Todd, sensing the walls closing in, changed tactics. Instead of denying, he started deflecting, claiming that the funds were investments that hadn't matured yet, but the judge wasn't having it. She held up one of the statements and said, "Mr. Tucker, what part of this looks like an investment?" Because to the court, it looks like a gift, and if looks could kill, Todd would have been escorted out in a body bag. But Kandi wasn't done. No, Kandi had been quiet too long. She finally spoke up, calmly, clearly, and with that tone she uses when she's about to drop the kind of truth Bravo producers dream about. She said, "Your Honor, for years, I've been told I was overreacting, dramatic, or making things up. But I don't need to be dramatic for something to be real." And then she turned her body slightly toward Todd and said, "You knew exactly what you were doing. You could practically hear the camera crews in their minds screaming. Why weren't we allowed to film this episode?" The judge, who clearly wished she had popcorn, allowed Todd to respond. Todd tried to paint a picture of a misunderstood husband, a creative man under pressure, someone just trying to build something. But every time he spoke, the attorneys pulled another document. Every time he defended himself, another receipt slid across the table. At one point, Todd said, "This is being taken out of context," and Kandi's lawyer responded, "The context is the timeline, and the timeline is your signature." It was the verbal equivalent of a folding chair to the back of the head. Then came the part that sent the entire gallery into meltdown. Kandi's lawyers presented what they called the December file. No one knew what was in it, but the second the label was read aloud, Todd visibly stiffened. The December file contains communications between Mr. Tucker and a third party that demonstrate a breach of marital trust, misuse of marital assets, and intent to conceal said communications from Mrs. Burruss. The heir left the room. Someone muttered, "Oh Lord," like they were in church. Even the judge leaned forward like she was listening to a bedtime story. The communications allegedly included hotel confirmations, Uber receipts, nighttime timestamps, and worst of all, voice notes. Voice notes that reportedly contained Todd saying, "She won't find out. I've got this handled." And the moment that line was read into the record, the courtroom exploded. Todd's attorney tried to object, but the judge overruled it instantly. Because once voice notes are mentioned, everything changes. It went from financial investigation to potential infidelity, from infidelity to deception, from deception to motive, and that's when Kandi reached her breaking point. She looked at the judge and said, "All I want is closure. I don't want revenge. I don't want drama. I want my peace back." The judge nodded slowly and said, "Mrs. Burruss, based on the evidence presented, we are moving forward with finalization," and Todd's entire posture collapsed. It looked like someone deflated him, but before anyone could say a word, Todd suddenly stood up, slammed his hands on the table, and said, "This is unfair." And that outburst? That was the moment everything spiraled. The judge banged her gavel so hard it echoed. The deputy stepped forward. Kandi didn't even flinch. And the judge said, "Mr. Tucker, sit down before this becomes more embarrassing than it already is." And that's exactly where the real storm began brewing, because the moment Todd sat back down, red-faced and furious, Kandi's team pulled out one last envelope, thicker, sealed, labeled with a single word that shifted the entire temperature of the courtroom. That one word read, "authorization," and that envelope was the reason everyone in the room realized this divorce wasn't just messy. It was historic. Exactly where this moment leaves off is where the next escalation explodes. That envelope labeled authorization sat on the table like it contained nuclear codes. And the second the judge saw it, her eyes narrowed. She adjusted her glasses the same way teachers do before they say, "Class, this is going to be good." Todd's posture changed again, this time not angry, not defensive, just terrified. He leaned forward like he was preparing to negotiate with destiny. But Kandi? She just sat back, hands folded, calm as a queen who already knew the empire was hers. Kandi's attorney opened the envelope slowly, theatrically like they'd rehearsed it. And inside was a single form stamped, notarized, approved. A document Todd had signed weeks before the divorce filing. And not just any document, this was a financial authorization form listing 3 accounts, all under Todd's management, giving him permission to move funds for business use without prior spousal notification. The problem? The dates. The dates were the downfall, because the transactions Kandi's team had presented earlier were all from days after Todd claimed he wasn't using that account anymore. The judge raised an eyebrow like she'd just caught a student cheating on a test, with the answer sheet taped under the desk. "Mr. Tucker," she said slowly, "do you deny signing this authorization?" Todd stuttered. He hesitated. He swallowed like his throat was closing. Finally, he whispered, "I don't recall." The judge blinked once, twice. Then she said, "You signed this in front of a notary, and the gallery lost it." Someone actually whispered, "He lying like a rug." The deputy gave them a warning look, but it was too late. The room was erupting in muffled chaos, and that's when Kandi spoke again, soft but sharp. "Your Honor, the reason this document is important is because Todd told me repeatedly that he wasn't using any joint accounts for his projects. But he signed this authorization behind my back." The judge flipped to the second page, reviewing signatures with the same intensity people use when they're checking lottery tickets. And she said, "This is exactly the kind of concealment that affects equitable division." Todd's lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "Sit down! I'm not finished." Suddenly, the entire courtroom went still. Even the air felt heavier, because now the judge wasn't questioning the spending. She was questioning intent. And intent changes everything. Intent means he knew. Intent means he misled. Intent means Kandi's case just went from solid to bulletproof, went from solid to bulletproof. Kandi's attorney then leaned forward and said, "Your Honor, there is one more document attached. A statement from a third party who claims Mr. Tucker offered them payment in exchange for sending false invoices to justify these transfers." The judge's jaw actually dropped. The gallery gasped again like a synchronized choir. Todd's attorney went pale. Todd himself looked like he needed water, oxygen, and maybe divine intervention. The judge asked, "Is this third party present?" And right on cue, a woman in the second row stood up. She looked nervous, clutching her bag like it had her last nerve in it. Kandi never even turned to look, she already knew. Todd's eyes widened and his whole soul left his body for a second. "Miss Daniels," the judge said, reading from the attached statement, "you claim Mr. Tucker contacted you on December 18th and asked that you prepare backdated invoices to make his transfers appear legitimate." The woman nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Todd shot up like a firework. "She's lying," he yelled. The judge banged the gavel so hard the sound bounced off the walls. "Mr. Tucker, you will not shout in my courtroom again." The deputy took one step forward, and Todd sank back down like gravity had doubled. The woman continued, voice shaking but steady enough. "I didn't do it. I refused. And when I refused, he stopped returning my calls." The judge scanned the statement, her tone sharpening. "So, you're telling this court Mr. Tucker tried to manipulate business records tied to marital assets?" The woman nodded again. Todd's lawyer tried to stand up, but the judge shut him down instantly. "Unless you have evidence to contradict this, sit." The silence that followed was the kind of silence people write about in novels. And then the judge spoke slow, controlled, lethal. "Based on the evidence presented and the credible testimony provided, this court finds that Mr. Tucker engaged in deceptive practices regarding marital finances. This will significantly impact division and final judgment." Todd looked like he aged 10 years in 10 seconds. And that's when Kandi finally let out a breath she'd been holding for years. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She just looked relieved, like the weight of a decade had finally slid off her shoulders. But the drama wasn't done. Because while the judge began reviewing final notes, Todd suddenly whispered something to his lawyer. The lawyer whispered back. Todd shook his head violently. The lawyer whispered again. Then Todd slammed his hand on the table for the second time that day because he clearly hadn't learned, then said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Fine, tell her." "Tell her then." The judge sighed like she was mentally preparing her resignation letter. The lawyer stood and said, "Your Honor, my client wishes to disclose additional information before the court issues final judgment." The judge closed her folder. "Proceed." The lawyer hesitated, then said, "Mr. Tucker wishes to assert that Mrs. Burruss was aware of his creative partnerships and approved several of the transfers in question." The gallery reacted instantly, murmuring like a hive of bees disturbed. Kandi didn't even blink. She simply said, "Produce the proof," and Todd had none, not one text, not one email, not one receipt, nothing. The judge glared at him like she wanted to say, "Sir, you are embarrassing yourself." Then she slammed the gavel once and announced, "This court is ready to finalize." Todd's shoulders fell. Kandi sat straighter. The entire courtroom went quiet again, waiting for history to finish writing itself. The judge read the formal declaration. Dissolution granted, division adjusted, terms finalized. Todd tried to interrupt twice and got shut down twice. Kandi didn't speak. Not because she didn't have anything to say, because she didn't need to. The evidence spoke for her when the judge officially declared, "This marriage is legally dissolved." Todd closed his eyes like he'd just been punched. Kandi exhaled softly, then picked up her purse, stood up, and said thank you to her attorney. Not to the court. Not to Todd, to the attorney who helped her reclaim her peace. But the real twist: the second Kandi walked outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her, people shouting questions, cameras flashing, microphones everywhere. And Kandi said nothing, just one small smile. But not a happy smile, not a petty smile. A free smile. Todd exited minutes later to a crowd that had already shifted their attention. Someone shouted, "Where did the money go?" Another yelled, "Who is RK?" Todd ignored them, rushing to his car like he owed someone money. And baby, according to those court records, he does. Kandi, meanwhile, slipped into her SUV, closed the door, and disappeared into the Atlanta traffic like a woman whose next chapter had already begun. Calm, collected, UNBOTHERED. Because sometimes the loudest victory is silence. And tonight, Kandi Burruss was silent and victorious, and there you have it, the divorce that went from whispers to courtroom warfare and ended in a final judgment that left Atlanta shook. But the real question is, what happens next? Will Todd suddenly reappear with a tell-all interview on a podcast nobody listens to? Will some mysterious creative partner come forward with new receipts? Will Mama Joyce host a celebratory dinner and accidentally leak the whole story to the internet? Or will Kandi surprise everyone with the comeback of the decade, turning this chaos into a Grammy, a Broadway show, and a restaurant menu item all at once? Because if there is one thing we've learned today, it's this: in the world of celebrity scandals, nothing ever ends when the papers are signed. The real tea starts after the judge bangs the gavel. So now it's your turn. Do you think Todd really didn't remember signing those papers? Do you believe the December file was the ticking time bomb everyone suspected? And do you think this divorce will finally give Kandi the peace she deserves? Or is this just the beginning of a brand new storm? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and make sure you subscribe for more explosive truths. The story isn't over, it's only getting louder. It's only getting louder.